Okay, welcome everyone. We are going to get started here. I am putting into the chat right now a link to the slides for today, so you can have reference to that. And you are here for the session titled Using Technology and Science-Backed Strategies to Make Happiness a Priority. Today we're going to be talking about how we can focus on happiness as we return back to the school year. I do want to say that this is not toxic positivity, and this is not being ignorant to what's happening in our world and in our schools, but rather the idea that there are steps and there are habits that we can take to help increase our own happiness, but also the happiness of our students. There's that bit.ly again, and this will be on nearly every slide. So if you don't get it right now, it'll come back around. It's bit.ly/Jeff Glade happiness. And that will give you access to these slides. You can make a copy of it. If you want to use it with staff that you work with your admin or your own students, feel free to do so, please. My name is Jeff Glade. I am a digital learning consultant. I'm part of the team that's hosting the summit this year, and I serve within the Des Moines or within the Heartland Area Education Agency. I serve regions 3 and 5. So what that means is I serve Johnston and West Des Moines schools, and then also everything south of Des Moines from roughly I-35 over to Pella. So if you are in one of those regions, I am your digital learning consultant. And if you are not in those regions, you can still feel free to reach out to me after the fact today. I'd love to share any of these resources or maybe explain and elaborate a little bit with you. There's my email, it's jglade@heartlandaea, and then you could also follow me on Twitter or Instagram, as I do share resources on there as well. So today we're going to be talking about the happiness advantage. In February of this year, I was lucky enough to go to a conference, FETC in Florida, and Shawn Achor was one of the keynotes, and he presented on these ideas. As soon as I got home from that conference, I bought the book and I read it, and I took copious notes. And as I was going through this, I started to make some connections to what I do and the tools that I work with a lot. This presentation, I should say this book, it's international bestseller. It's been around now for almost 10 years, I think. He has a TED Talk. It's one of the top 25 TED Talks of all time. He was on Oprah's Super Soul Sunday talking about this, and one of his claims to fame in that regard was that he was the first two-parter ever. She asked him to extend their conversation because she was so interested in his ideas. A lot of this work came from a course that he taught at Harvard. It was the most popular course, at least at the time, the most popular course that Harvard had ever offered. And then he has become a consultant traveling the world, bringing these ideas into Fortune 500 companies, as well as lots of school districts as well. So a lot of the information that we talk about today will be good for you as a person, you as a professional, but then also we can take a lot of these, and I think we should take a lot of these ideas and bring it to our students and our buildings as well. So that's Shawn. And then there I did link, so if you go to the presentation, I did link his TED Talk there. We're not going to watch it right now, but you have access to it right there. I think it's like 11 minutes long. Oh, skip that, sorry. So the idea here, kind of driving this book and then in turn this presentation, is that happiness fuels success. So a lot of the research that they've done has shown that strictly by being happier people, we are 31% higher. Our productivity is 31% higher. We're 3 times more creative, up to 10 times more engaged, 19% higher accuracy in the work that we do, and then our stress reduces greatly as well. There are ways that we can increase our happiness, and that's what we're talking about today. So there's all these benefits, and they're proven with study after study after study. And if we can take some small steps, I think, to increase our own happiness as educators, we're going to be better teachers, less stressed. If we look at some of these ideas here, less stressed, more engaged with our students, more creative with the lesson plans that we're delivering, but then also bring that to our students as well. They're more engaged. So we know that engagement is a tricky thing with students. And so if we can help implement some of these ideas with them as well, I see that we can have more engaged audiences in our classrooms. One of the things that stuck with me is that the formula that I grew up with and the formula I'm still struggling with is backwards. So that's on the left-hand side here. And the idea there would be that if we work hard, we're going to become more successful. And if we're more successful, we're happier. The problem with that is that the happiness is we're waiting till the end to be happy. And then that's sort of a moving target. What is successful? You know, if we get the new role, the new position, we want to go to the next position, so that it's a moving target and we never really get to happiness. So that's backwards. If we can reframe our thinking there, and if we start with happiness, lots of studies, and again, we're going to reference a lot of these today, lots of studies have proven that our brain works better when we are happy. When our brain works better, then we become successful. So we can find that success, but we can be happy the whole way through. So, why wouldn't we choose that? Happiness, it's the precursor to success. It's not the result of success. And if you save happiness to only be happy once you're successful, you're missing out on years and years of happiness. One of the driving forces as I was putting together this presentation is the idea that happiness isn't just a mood, it's a work ethic. If we're going to be happy, we have to work for it. And there are simple tricks that we can utilize, and we're going to look at those today, of course, but we do have to work for it. It's not going to just come innately to most of us. There have been some studies that show that some people are genetically just a little more predisposed to happiness, but we can overcome that as well with this work and with putting in the work. So we're going to start with the idea of priming the brain. Just closed my presentation. Let's get back there. So priming the brain, what we're talking about there is that there was a study, if I can type and talk at the same time, there was a study that worked with 4-year-olds. And those 4-year-olds were given blocks. So with the blocks, they were asked to kind of solve problems with the blocks. So put together different combinations of them and different creations. And when they were doing that, there were 2 groups. One group was just given those directions, as I told you. Nothing really happy or sad about it, just neutral. They were given these directions, said, hey, here's some blocks. We're going to ask you to make this shape. And then the other group, before they were given the directions, were said, think of a happy moment. So these are 4-year-olds. So their happy moments were, probably dessert from the night before or something random. But nonetheless, those 4-year-olds, in their brains, what was happy to them? When they were thinking about their happy moment before they were given the directions, those 4-year-olds were much more creative, quick, and accurate with solving the problems that they were given, building those blocks and otherwise. When we can prime the brain, we are setting kids up for success. We're setting ourselves up for success. If we can start with that happy moment or that moment of amusement, we can prime the brain to be more successful. So this is the way I've sort of structured this. We're going to look at a study. We'll look at a principle that Shawn has suggested. And then after that, I will provide some technology tips or ideas or resources that you can use to implement those ideas. So the first one, videos to spark amusement. The idea that if we can start class or start an activity with something that is happy or sparks amusement or curiosity, we are more engaged. We're better problem solvers. We're more creative thinkers. So a resource I love for that is the kid should see this. Now, this was put together by parents originally for their one child. The kid should see this, and they have found, now it's grown bigger, they have found thousands of videos that are curated across lots of different topics. And I have those topics across the bottom, from science to food to music to history, and they're just usually short videos, and sometimes they give some supporting information about that video. But I always like to start, I did on Fridays, but I wish I would have done it on Mondays or multiple times during the week, which is show a funny or an interesting video that helps kids to get to that place of amusement or happiness. And if we can start that class or that lesson or a day with a short little video, science has proven that we are more creative and we are happier and we're better problem solvers when we can start a moment with a little piece of happiness. A lot of this goes towards something that is called the happiness baseline. So if we have this baseline of happiness, we are functioning at a higher level. So I showed that graphic at the beginning of the presentation where we're things like 10 times more engaged. When we can raise our happiness baseline, we are setting ourselves up for success. So with that in mind, Shawn references different quick sort of tips to get to a happier place in life. And these are things that we can implement quickly on a daily basis to just raise that happiness baseline. One of them is meditation. So you've, of course, heard of meditation. There was a really cool study done at Google where they had their employees take their hands off of their keyboards and then breathe in and out for 2 minutes. There wasn't a guided meditation going on. They were just focusing on their breath for 2 minutes. After a week, those employees that were doing that, participating in that activity, outperformed their peers in all performance metrics that Google measured. So just simply 2 minutes a day of nothing but just breathing and focusing on that meditative exercise improved their productivity and their work habits. But then also, super interestingly, the way that we are such social creatures, members on their team and in their department that didn't participate in the exercise, their performance metrics went up. Because we'll get to it later in this presentation, but there's things called mirror neurons, and our brain works in ways, and we see how other people are acting and we internalize some of that. We've heard of that before, that attitudes are contagious. This is proven in this activity that simply by taking 2 minutes of breath, it improved the whole department's productivity. We can also use different apps. So you've likely heard of Calm or Headspace are two of the more popular ones, and both of them actually offer free subscriptions to educators. So if you provide your email, you can get a free membership to the app. So you could use that for yourself. You could also play that if you have a speaker in your room. You could play one of those meditative exercises in your classroom. And then the last way that I thought about connecting meditation to technology is with podcasts. So there are two listed there. Meditation Minis is a podcast that focuses on about 10-minute little meditative chunks that are guided. And that's, I would say, more for our older students, and I would say middle school and up. And then Be Calm on Ahway Island is another one that's meant for the younger students. So if you were to do this with your kids, your students, it focuses on the, I would say, primary students and gives them some meditative exercises and breathing activities. Okay, another way that we can quickly raise our happiness baseline is to find something to look forward to. So studies have shown that the act of looking forward to something, it can have just as much of a positive effect as the event itself. So if we're going on a trip, the lead up to that trip, the anticipation gives us just as many endorphins as the trip itself does, actually. And so that is in and of itself interesting. So if we have something to look forward to, we are experiencing some of the endorphins ahead of time. But then additionally, if we take a moment to write or type out that event onto a calendar or in some other way, it raises that even further. So we could utilize Google Calendar or an analog calendar, or some way that you could have your students at the beginning of a week, at the beginning of a trimester, semester, or even school year, look at their calendar, look at their year. What are they looking forward to? It could be Christmas break. It could be winter break, I should say. It could be something else, a trip that they have, an activity that's coming up, performance. And if they calendar that, the act of doing so helps to internalize that, and it gives us something to look forward to, which is raising that happiness baseline. Exercise, we all know that exercise has good effects, but lots of studies have shown that it can actually be just as effective as antidepressants in certain cases. There are other cases where the medication is needed, of course, but in certain cases, exercise has proven to be just as effective. And of course, it has a lower chance of relapse to that depression. So we could do that in the classroom. It's hard, of course. If you have outdoor space, that makes it a little bit easier. But Go Noodle, if you teach the younger students, Go Noodle is a really great resource. It has a website and an app with free educator accounts where there are different exercises that you can do that are quick, short little snippets of getting kids out of their chair and moving. There are YouTube channels that do this. There's one, Yoga for the Classroom, that has just what it sounds like. So more calming exercise, but yoga for the classroom. And then PE with Joe became really popular over the beginning stages of the pandemic, and he is still putting out videos. There's an example of one 5-minute move, and some of his videos are meant for classroom spaces, meaning some of the moves are less big. Another way that we can raise our happiness baseline, and this is one of my favorite things that I'm going to talk about today, which is our signature strengths. So the way education is structured lots of times is that we are deficit focused. So we are having kids focus on what they're not good at. We're having kids practice what they're not good at. And that really starts to beat a kid down. So they start to feel like they're not good at anything. They overlearn that lesson. I'm not good at this thing. They start to generalize it to other aspects of their life. Now, there are certain elements in education that we do have to keep working on. So if a student's not decoding, we do need to help them practice that. But also we should be focusing on their strengths. There are lots of studies that show that when we help students focus on their strengths, they grow at huge, rapid rates. And so one way that we can help students discover their strengths or help discover our own strengths is something called the signature character strengths. So this is put together by different psychologists after lots of studies. They put them into 24 rough categories of character strengths. There's a free survey from VIA, and I linked it there, where you can take a survey. It takes about 15 minutes, and then it produces actually ranks all of your strengths from what your strongest area is all the way to what your weakest area is. And if we can look at those top 5, it helps us to become more happy, more effective, and more productive. So when we are referencing these strengths and coming to own our strengths, studies have shown that when we implement those strengths, our growth and our happiness baseline raises even faster. One way that we can utilize that information is to actually name strengths and produce an image. So we could write down these strengths. Again, the act of writing or the act of putting something down helps it stick with our brains that much more. So one way I thought we could do this is just produce an image. So a little sort of summary image of who we are. And so there's mine for Jeff Glade. You can see that my number 1 strength is love of learning. My other strengths are creativity, leadership, social intelligence, and prudence. And so if I focus on those and actively, explicitly think about those strengths in moments of weakness or in moments where I'm stressed out, it will help me to solve my problems and think more creatively. That Adobe Express template, if you click on that, you can just utilize it. It'll look basically just like mine, change the background colors, the information, and the little icons, and you or your students could have their own image that references their strengths. So if we do this with students, we could print this out. If you have access to printing, put it in their locker or somewhere that they can see what their strengths are and be reminded that they do have strengths, that they're great at things, and that will help them to focus on the positive. So the second principle is the fulcrum and the lever. So we talked about sort of the happiness advantage and the happiness baseline. Now we're looking at the fulcrum and the lever. So we're talking simple machines here. And when we're thinking simple machines in the fulcrum, if we can move the fulcrum closer and get the lever longer, we have more power. And so that's sort of what we're talking about here, is we're focusing on owning our own power and what we are doing, what we can do to control the situation. A study that's mentioned in the book, and I don't think I mentioned that if you do go to this presentation at that bit.ly, I have in the speaker notes the pages. So if you were to get the book, and if this is resonating with you in the book, you can see the page numbers where I reference some different studies. So the expectancy theory in this case is connected to poison ivy. So expectancy theory is when we expect something, lots of times that is the thing that we're going to see, that is the thing that we're going to experience, because perception in our worlds is actually most of our reality. In this study, there were Japanese teenagers, and this was done back before some studies had some stricter guidelines, because some of what they did here could not be done today. But they had a group of Japanese teenagers who all had a more severe allergic reaction to poison ivy. So they took the group and they blindfolded them and they rubbed poison ivy on their arm. Again, this is a group that has a stronger allergic reaction to poison ivy. They rubbed the poison ivy on their arms. As expected, they all broke out into, sores and rashes and whatever else came with that. But what's not expected is that it wasn't actually poison ivy. It was a bush that they were not allergic to. They were told it was poison ivy, but it wasn't. They expected this horrible reaction, and that's what they got. Then on the other arm, they kept them blindfolded and they said, okay, now on the other arm, we're going to rub this harmless plant, whatever plant they told them, we're going to rub this on your arm. And only a couple broke out into rashes and sores and things, and that arm did have poison ivy. So for scientific reasons are a little fuzzy in my mind right now related to this, but for whatever reason, that expectancy theory, they were able to fight off the poison ivy chemicals that would traditionally give them stronger reactions. What we expect can sometimes become our reality. And our reality and what we expect sometimes has been clouded by what the world has told us. So what identity are you wearing today is an interesting idea, which this could relate to all of our students, but especially students who come from populations that are underrepresented or underserved. So the first study that is referenced here was done with a group of Asian women, and those Asian women were taking a math test at different times. They took the same math test twice, or the same level of difficulty of math test twice. The first time they took the test, they were given prompts and discussions that helped them to focus on their female gender identity. As you might have heard before, lots of times, traditionally, our society has said that girls or women or people who associate with those labels are not as good at math. This group of women did not score well on their math test, math exam that they were taking. They scored below their peers and what was expected. Then another day, same group of women, same level of difficulty of math test. They were given question prompts and things to focus on their Asian heritage, their Asian identity. Again, stereotypes have told us through our society that Asian people are good at math. And I know you know that where this is going, the women scored much higher on the math test than they had done previously. So focusing on who we believe we are can affect our confidence, which in turn affects our performance and our knowledge and our creativity and our problem solving. The next two studies here are connected. So the first one, they both have to do with Black males, Black men, young Black men. And the first one, similar to the previous study where they were taking a test multiple times with similar levels of difficulty. The first time they took the test, they filled out a demographic survey at the beginning where they said, I'm African American or I'm Black or however they're identifying. And then they took the test. They scored well below their peers, well below their peers of different ethnicities. A second time, they did not take the demographic test, took the test, and they scored on level with their peers because they were not identifying in that moment of a demographic that they've been told before is not up to par or is not as smart. That connects to the last one, which was a study done in 2008. So right before the 2008 election, similar group, this was older men who were Black, took a similar test. They did not score very well on the test. The day after Barack Obama was elected to the presidency in 2008, they took the same level of test and they scored above their peers because the day before they had seen, for the first time in their lives, they had seen a Black man rise to the highest position in our country. They had a belief, they had an ownership of their identity that some of them had probably never felt before. Pretty incredible stuff. So if we can bring that to kids, how can we utilize technology? So those of you who know me know that I do a lot of work with podcasts, and I felt like this was a really perfect time to bring this in, which is we need to be showing kids windows to the world, but also mirrors. They need to be able to see themselves represented. They need to see themselves represented in ways that have been successful. And podcasts are a really great way to do that. So when students are able to hear information on a wide variety of activities, they don't necessarily have to worry about the decoding that could be a hurdle for them, and they can just focus on the ideas, and the cognitive load of that reading is removed, and then they can come to text that is richer and more interesting maybe for them or more engaging. So this was just an example of, I did a collected curated list of podcasts for Black History Month, and then we created a summary of one of the episodes. Lena Richard, she was one of the first celebrity chefs actually. Even before Julia Child, she had her own cooking show, and we used Adobe Express to just make this little summary of the episode. I have lots of different curated lists on that could represent those underrepresented groups. So Pride, Disability, Native American, Black History, AAPI, and then Hispanic Heritage Month. So if you were to click on that link, it'll take you to my website and you can have access to all of those for free. But the idea here is that we're just trying to find representation for all of our students. Some of our students see themselves represented in their world in positive ways all the time. Unfortunately, that's not the case for everybody. So as we just saw, if we help students to see themselves in successful arenas, they are going to be more successful. We can also do that with the AEA resources you all have access to if you are teaching in Iowa. So here I just found PebbleGo and PebbleGo Next. So PebbleGo is for roughly pre-K3 and PebbleGo Next is roughly for grades 4 through 6. And these are just the biography section. You can see that PebbleGo has done a great job of finding a vast representation of people that they are focusing on. And so again, students can find themselves represented. And then the last one for this section is Epic. So Epic Books is free for students and teachers. Students have access only during the school day. Teachers, we have access outside of the school day so we can prep collections and things. So there's books, there's audiobooks, videos, read to me. And then from there, we could search by topic and then click on collections to find collections that other educators or Epic has created. And I just found a couple right here. So you can see that Epic has created one for Hispanic Heritage Month and then one for Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. And there's going to be roughly, depending on the collection, about 20 books that students can explore to, again, find those windows, but also those mirrors. Okay, the next principle, trying to chug along here, is the Tetris effect. And uh, in the book, they talk about the Tetris effect. If you've ever played Tetris for hours at a time, you know that when you're done and you close your eyes to go to sleep, you're seeing shapes float down. If you see a tile floor, you're starting to see shapes in the tile floor. And that's the idea here, which is that when we train our brain to look for things, our brain is more likely to see those things. um, our brains are taking in so much information that it has to filter out most of it. So our brains, studies have shown that our brains can only process about 1 out of every 100 bit of information that comes to us. So within 1 out of 100 snowflakes within the blizzard of our world. And whatever we attend to first becomes your reality. So a lot of this is that perception. Perception becomes reality here. When we are training ourselves to see the Tetris shapes, that's what we're going to see. When we train ourselves to see the good moments in our days and in our lives and in our students, that's what we're going to see. A cool study about that is this predictive encoding, which is basically what I just described, the idea that when you believe something and you are trained to see or look for that thing, you start to see that thing. So this was a study done with people who were looking in newspapers. And in the newspaper, they were given, it was kind of like a race. So how can they count how many photographs are in this newspaper and timed how quickly they could do it. But then the sample group, they had split them into a group that defined themselves as lucky people. For whatever reason in their life, they have felt lucky. They felt like they've had a lot of lucky moments. And then the other group actively felt like they were unlucky people. As they were going through this study, through this newspaper, counting pictures, the lucky group did it light years faster than the others. And part of the reason, and they were able to come up with the correct answer, which was 48 pictures. Part of the reason that they were able to do it so much faster is because on page 2 of the newspaper, it said, stop looking through this newspaper. There are 48 pictures. Those lucky people had trained themselves to look for the good, look for the lucky moments, and they found it. On page 2, they were done. But then if they kept looking further, I don't know what page, but several pages later, there was another similar kind of box that said, go talk to the person who's administering this and tell them you saw this because you will win $250. Not one person from the unlucky group won $250. Several people from the lucky group did. They had trained themselves and they believed that they could find and seek out that positive moment. Pretty incredible. Gratitude, I think, is something that is mentioned a lot, especially in education realm. So this little slide is probably not groundbreaking for anyone, but there are studies that show when we practice gratitude, we're more energetic, emotionally intelligent, forgiving, less likely to be depressed, anxious or lonely. And those people also become happier, optimistic, more persistent, and even actually have fewer headaches, which is interesting. So it affects us physically as well. One way that we can practice gratitude utilizing technology would be using a Google form. So if we use the 3 good things form, so this is a study that Shawn Achor had done, which is if we recognize 3 good things from our day, every day for 7 days, those people were shown to be happier 1 month later, 3 months later, and even 6 months later. Again, they'd only done that little activity, that 3 good things for 7 days, but the benefits lasted at least 6 months. And in doing so, those people were becoming better at scanning their world and recognizing the good. So that Tetris effect, they're seeing the good because we're training our brains. These are habits. Happiness is a work ethic, and we can do it if we practice it. So this is a really slick way that we can do it. It's just a Google form. It's not a fancy form, but if you click that, you can just make a copy of the form I made and just start tracking 3 good things that happened today. The rule that they did in the study is they said it has to be new things, so you can't repeat something. And those things really should be from something that happened in that day. So not just, I have a great family, but maybe find a moment from your day that shows how you have a great family that you're grateful for. And then we can also make that much easier by using a Google Calendar or tasks, which are kind of work in conjunction with one another to set a reminder. And then within that reminder, put the link. So when you get that reminder, it will say, hey, it's time for your gratitude form, your 3 good things form. And you click the link right there, you type in your 3 things, and you've done that for the day. You're on your way to becoming that much happier. I mentioned this near the beginning, but this is not toxic positivity. And this is something that Shawn Achor references as well. So toxic positivity, sort of by definition, is basically forcing people to feel positive even when things are not happy in that moment. And he talks about the idea that we can still recognize that things in our life, things in our world are not ideal. And that's just critical thinking, and that is being reasonable. And this quote that he has there is better than I could word it. So I'm just going to read it. It says, the ideal mindset isn't heedless of negatives in our world, but it does give priority to the good. Not just because that is what makes us happier, but because that is precisely what creates more good. He talks about rose tinted glasses and how he actually likes the term, because the idea there would be that it's making everything look that much better. It's really pulling out and highlighting the moments in our day that are good, that are positive, that we should be recognizing. I didn't say it at the beginning, but if you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. It looks like Kathy's doing a great job of moderating for me, and we can address things now or at the end of the session. Okay, so the next principle is the Zorro circle. This comes from the movie Zorro, which I'm not familiar with the movie, but the idea here is that Zorro draws a circle with his sword, I guess, in the sand, and that is what he can control. He's standing inside of it. He can control himself, and then from there on, also he's taking small steps to make things better within his world. So the idea here is control. And there was a cool study, again, done with residents in a nursing home. So these residents were given more control, or at least the perception of control, in that they were given a houseplant to take care of. Those residents had felt like they had no control in their lives anymore. Having the act of taking care of this houseplant, something they felt like they could control, they became happier. They were more engaged in the activities that were happening in the facility, and their mortality rate went down. So in this example, at least, it helped them to live longer. The idea of control lengthened their life. And then alongside that is the idea of the internal locus of control. So that's the belief that our actions have a direct effect on their outcomes. Those with the belief have those bullet points that I don't have to read, but the thing that really sticks with me here is it's the belief that you have control, not even that fact that you do. So you might not actually have control, but if you believe that you do, those people who believe that they do, get all of those benefits there. How can we bring that to ourselves, but also our students? One way is through choice boards and menus. So rather than that traditional station rotation model where students go from station A to B to C and they have to do every element of that, we could implement something called a choice board or a menu, which gives them some level of choice, some level of control over the situation. And then I put this in here as well, which is a link to that Would You Rather from Katie Novak's amazing keynote this morning. And that's tied to UDL principles. And again, it's so instead of giving students this activity, give them a couple options. The options aren't too many, they're not overwhelmed by choices, but they do have some level of control. As studies have shown, as we just talked about, when you feel like you have control, you're happier, which leads to better problem solving, more creativity, and better relationships with our peers. So, but when we don't have control, those moments of distress, and the people who are experiencing that, who are the quickest to recover, are those who can say how they're feeling and then put those feelings into words. And then identifying those feelings and points of control. There's an exercise that we can talk about here. And I made this Google Slides template, which is just the idea that if you click on that, you can make a copy, and I will do that right now. And on the sides, we're going to have moments, or we're going to have ideas that we can control, and then those that we can't. So let me zoom out just a little bit here. Oh, okay, so that zoomed out just a touch too much, so I'll zoom in. But here, the idea here is that when students or adults are having a moment that they feel like is challenging, let's put it into words. So we can click here and we can type out what the situation is, how we're feeling about it. When we get that out of our body, we're able to recover that much quicker. Then we can take it to the control place. Where do we have control? Let's sort elements of this situation into what we have control on, what we can impact, and what we can't. So what we can do here is just drag a green box and type an element that you have control over. Same with the red side. So this is something that I don't have control over. I cannot fix that. So students can type, or adults can type in there, an item that they have no control over. Go through a few different elements of that situation. And then the next slide is, I can zoom in on this one. The next slide here is go choose one of those things that you have control over. You can either copy and paste that box or type it in here and then start to plan your steps. How are you going to address this moment? How can we improve the situation because we have control over this part of the situation? And then the next slide would be pick one of those red items, those things we don't have control over. But now let's start to think how we might actually, what's the counterfact that we can tell ourselves so that we can shift our understanding of the situation to actually do have a little bit of control over this moment. And so they can start to type through that. So that's giving them two sides of the situation, which is recognizing what you have control over, but then also figuring out that you might have more control than you realize, and rethinking something from a different perspective is a powerful exercise for all of us. Okay, as we're racing towards the finish line here, the fifth principle is the 20-second rule. And the idea here is just that if we can make things happen in 20 seconds, we're more likely to do them. So any habit that we can lower the activation energy for, we're more likely to participate in. If we put fruit on the countertop, rather than, in the bowl in the corner of the counter, we're more likely to eat it if it's within reach. What can we do to make all of these things easier for us? Part of this idea is that willpower is a finite resource, and this is really interesting to me. We lose willpower. It doesn't just go on forever and ever. And a study that showed this was that there was two groups, and they were asked to solve a problem, as many of these studies do. And in one of the groups, they were given, there was nothing in the room. They were just, here's the problem, please solve it. The other group was given also a little thing of cookies, chocolate chip cookies, but they were told, but you can't eat these chocolate chip cookies. The group who had the chocolate chip cookies in their room solved at a much slower rate and also less accurate than the group that didn't have the chocolate chip cookies. And that is because part of their mental energy was dealing with the willpower to not eat the cookie. And if we think about that, especially with our students, I think that's really valuable to consider. What are students contending with? What is the cognitive load going towards? If we can remove barriers, remove temptations from students, they're more able to focus. That seems sort of obvious, but I never heard a situation where it was so directly impacting it. And the idea that our willpower, we only have so much. And if we have those students who are contending with different attention situations or, self-control, they're contending with a lot. The willpower, the brain power that they have left to give towards the worksheet you give them is reduced. And that 20-second rule I sort of talked about here. Oh, good. I saw Brian. Phones are their chocolate chip cookies. Absolutely. Totally true. So if, there's lots of different situations, and there's also lots of studies that talk about how our brains react to just hearing the sound or those phantom vibrations in our pants, because we are so trained, and then we check it. And if we hear the phone sound, there's been studies that show that we solve less, even if our phone wasn't in the room. There's no way we could have heard our phone, but we heard a phone, it affected our thinking. I love that connection. So the 20-second rule is just how can we make things quicker here? And so one way we can do that is with Google Workspace. So most educators in this are using Google Workspace, but then there would also be things that are connected to Microsoft, if that's what you use. But within Workspace, I linked some tutorials that would show you how to do these things, but basically in tasks and calendars, we can set those reminders with links. I showed that with 3 good things. I'm about to show you something called a gratitude email that you could do this with. Just make the activation energy that much less. All you have to do, you got the push notification. Just click on the link and do the thing, and you're on your way to raising that happiness baseline. Within Gmail, there's some slick tricks you can use. So schedule send. So you can, if maybe you have a lot of time near the beginning of your year and you want to reach out to each kid on their birthday and send them an email because you're afraid in the thick of the school year you may forget. Do that schedule send at the beginning. Hey, Patrick, happy birthday. I love having you in class. I love your curiosity and your enthusiasm for everything. Some short little message, schedule that at the beginning of the year. When they get that email throughout the school year, it is going to mean a lot to them. And we'll talk about social connection in a minute. Those moments are so powerful. We can lower the activation energy and utilize these tools. There's also templates in Gmail. So as I just sort of narrated what a happy birthday email might sound like, you can structure that as a template, insert that template, and then change a couple details to, address that kid specifically. Google Keep is a great tool. You can do checklists in Google Keep. Those checklists can be tied to reminders that, again, are push notifications. So maybe we know how important it is to talk and interact with each student. Maybe you want to make sure that you talk to each student, depending on how many kids you teach. if it's your own classroom, a gen ed elementary classroom, every day, let's hope you have an individual connection with them. And on your phone, you can just check off, I talked to Patrick today. And then they start to cross off and you can see, oh, I haven't reached out to, so-and-so today. Make sure to do so. Yeah, and you could do that over the course of a week, whatever makes sense in your world. And then the last idea I had here to lower that activation energy is within Google Docs, we have new tools called building blocks and smart chips. And Alex Glade had a session earlier today that I think he was talking about some of these things. So as you come, if you didn't see that earlier, you could come back to the recordings and view that. But the idea here is that within Google Docs, now, if you type the @ symbol, it's going to bring up a new menu that didn't used to be there. And there are some building blocks, and you can co-construct an email with your PLC or whoever else within Google Docs and then send it from there, and it'll tie to your email. So that's just one sort of simple way. But these messages, these things that we are trying to do, we know these habits are good. How can we make it easier for ourselves so we're more likely to do it? And then those building blocks and those smart chips, Google's adding to them all the time. So even if something doesn't feel like a good fit right now, I would keep checking that little @ symbol in a doc and see what comes, because they're improving that every day. Okay, the last principle that we're going to talk about is social investment. So important in our world, and that is actually one of the most important things to happiness, which is our social connections. So there's this We Shine Brighter Together, this really cool situation in Indonesia in, I think it was like the 30s or 40s, I forget off the top of my head, but there was a scientist who was there and he noticed that a whole tree lit up with fireflies or lightning bugs, a whole tree lit up. And then he realized that the entire mangrove forest that he was in, he was on a boat, started lighting up at once. And it was as if they were speaking and communicating with each other. And he reported on it. And at the time, people didn't really believe that. It didn't make sense to them. But since then, mathematicians and entomologists and other researchers have found what's happening here. So the reason a male lightning bug lights up is to attract a female. And if a male lightning bug is lighting up on its own, it is 3%. There's a 3% chance that it will be successful in that evening to reach its goal. 3% is not great odds. But then they found that when a whole group or swarm, I don't know what they're called, of lightning bugs light up together, when they all light up at once, that 3% raises to 87% chance of completing their goal of mating in that evening. So that's shocking. That is a huge jump. And it doesn't make a lot of sense, because you would think, well, our society has trained us to compete with one another. If everybody's good, then I'm not good, right? So, but that's not what science shows us. Science shows us that we shine brighter together. So when we can raise, all boats raise with the tide, when we can bring up everyone together and work together, we are more likely to be successful. One other study that references this is the power of others. So when we have a social connection, how important it can be. So a study was done with people looking at a really steep hill that they had to climb. The people who were going to climb that hill were asked to estimate how tall that hill was. Similar study done, but the other group had someone with them. They had a social connection with them. And interestingly, this other person didn't even have to be looking at the hill. As long as they were next to them or near them, this group of people, when they estimated how steep that hill was, estimated it 20 to 30% smaller. The hill became smaller to them just because there was a social connection near them. Again, this wasn't something, they weren't like brainstorming together. It was just the idea that I have somebody with me. This hill, this mountain, this task, it's not that bad. So when we can make those connections, everything in our life becomes easier. So we have that perception is reality. So one way that we can help students to make connections with us as teachers would be with Flip. So it used to be known as Flipgrid. So this is, there's the example link there. If you click that, it will take you to an example, and you can just take it from the Discovery Library and make a copy of it for yourself. Lots of you have probably done this, but giving students the opportunity to introduce themselves to you with their name, their pronouns, things that they're interested in, their hopes, their goals for the year, and then letting them know that this is just for you. Nobody else is going to see this. That can strengthen that connection between you and your students. The studies have shown that supervisors to supervisees are one of the most important connections to success in productivity. So we're talking supervisors to supervisees, but also that could apply to educators or teachers to their students. So when we can allow them to introduce themselves, and then Flip has some really great features as well, where you can just, as you're cooking dinner, press play on it and it will play the video for Patrick, but then it will automatically go to the next video. And you can start to just internalize and hear your different students introducing themselves, make those connections the next time you see them. You know that they love monster trucks. Talk about a monster truck, even if you have no knowledge about a monster truck. Quick Google search, you can say, hey, I know you love monster trucks. My favorite is Megalodon, whatever it might be. Those connections are so valuable and so important. Science and these research studies have shown that connections, social connections, are one of the most important things, but that's so hard when students don't have the connections, right? So there are some students who find it hard to make connections, they find it hard to make friends. So how can we help to sort of give them that running start? And one of the easiest ways is for us to be that person for them. We can also use this or that activities. So these are always fun. Or you could do like, would you rather, whatever sort of situation where it's like, pick this thing or that thing. And these examples come from Esther Park. She'll actually be a webinar for us after winter break in 2023. So these examples come from her, and she does this with Pear Deck. So again, you all have access to Pear Deck for free thanks to the AEA system. You can have students drag a draggable, whatever you choose, but drag a draggable to which item they like more. And this, you've probably done this before, and this is something that is just fun. It's a fun engagement activity for students, but then let's take it the next step. So the whole idea is here, we're helping students find those connections. If we do dogs or cats, let's say, now have the students come into groups that are all the dog people or all the cat people, and they have to pick one. And if they're too big, you could, make them smaller groups, but then just talk about how great dogs are, right? And so as they start to connect about dogs and what they love about dogs and that shared interest, especially for those students who struggle with this, that gives them that one piece that they can connect with that peer that they don't know what to talk about. Well, now I know that they love dogs, and I know that they have this dog or this dog's name. And so it gives them those connections, that running start into some of those important social connections. So they might be silly, but this is just that social grease that a lot of students might need. Okay, and then there's a quote from the book that says, loneliness isn't the absence of people, but it's the absence of positive impact on people or their impact on you. So again, if we are struggling to find friends or we feel lonely, well, we can sort of take control. We're going back to that other principle, take control of the situation. And if we have a positive impact on someone else, our brain functions in a way that feels like a social connection. So one thing that we can do is just take 2 minutes a day and send a positive message to someone in your life. Real short stuff. There's been studies from the book that are referenced that doing so for a week straight resulted in the strongest social connection scores of their populations. So just doing 2 minutes a day for a week, send that positive message to someone new, of course, every day, a teacher, a former teacher, a mentor, a friend, whoever it could be. And you're going to get lots of emails back. Oh my gosh, this made my day. Or especially for us who are a little older, go back to like an old teacher, find them on Facebook or something. And you know that that's going to brighten their whole year hearing from you. And knowing that you had that positive impact on someone is proven to be just as good as having all those friends. Just making that positive impact functions as that social connection. And utilize that 20-second rule. Make it an easy task. Set the reminder, put the link in there, just make it happen, make it that much easier to happen. The last element of this is just the ripple effect. So everything that we've talked about, all of this has ripples. We get to impact everyone else in our world. And I referenced this near the beginning, which is there's something called mirror neurons. So a mirror neuron is what makes us yawn when we see someone else yawn. Our eyes see an activity. Our eyes have mirror neurons, which are tied to our motor neurons, and it tricks our body into thinking, oh, I need to yawn too. So if I yawn right now, I bet at least one person in the room started to feel like they needed to yawn. Those mirror neurons trick our body into feeling a certain way. And that applies to smiles as well. So if you were to look at someone smiling, we are more likely to smile when we see someone else smiling because of the mirror neurons tied to those motor neurons. Then what's awesome is our brain knows what a smile means. Our brain knows that smiles mean happiness. It starts to release a little bit of those endorphins that make us happy. So we can sort of force ourselves into happiness through smiling, even if we're not feeling in that moment that we need to smile. this idea here, this ripple effect, smiling's, one of the more basic elements here, but everything that we've talked about up to this point, we can have that ripple out to other people in our world. And again, a study has shown that the common person, the way this works, we can actually have impact on 1,000 people because of our connections, and then those connections to other people and the way that ripples out, the butterfly effect of it all. So we could affect 1,000 people just by living the habits that we've talked about today. You could have that effect on 1,000 people. So my task for you, my goal for you, is to take some of these elements, take these ideas, hopefully utilize some of the templates I gave you, some of those links. Again, you have access to the presentation, and try it on yourself, see how you feel. We're coming back to school. I felt like this was a perfect time for this. You could, if you lead an EPD in your building, you could do that. You could talk to a principal about some of these ideas that you could implement. You could do it with your own students. You have the power. You have the power to have that ripple effect and send it forward. So go forth and smile and take that happiness and live a better, fuller, richer life. If you have questions, here's my contact information one more time. There's email, different social medias. You can reach out to me. This is something that I've been spending a lot of time with since February. I've spent a lot of time reading and double checking and coming up with ideas, and it's something I'm passionate about, and it's something that I know I could improve on, which is these daily habits that lead to and are proven to lead to a happier life. I think that educators need this right now, not through any fault of their own, but it's just a hard time to be an educator. And those of you who are in buildings, I respect the work you're doing so greatly. And I would like us all to feel that power and feel the control that we can have over our own happiness. So with that said, I was kind of glancing at the chat, and I don't think that there were any questions, but Kathy could feel free to interrupt if there was one that I mentioned, or that I missed, I should say. But otherwise, I want to encourage all of you to head back to that main room. I don't know if George Valenzuela is still going. You might catch the last couple minutes of his session, but at the end of that, we will be giving out prizes and talking a little bit about what tomorrow can look like. And there's still time for all of you to invite any of your friends, any of your colleagues, because they'll get access to all the recordings. And we just want to get all of this learning to as many people as we can. Thank you for taking your time to join us, and I look forward to learning with you the rest of today and tomorrow.